If you have more granular needs when syncing from Knowify to QuickBooks, then you can set up your mapping in Knowify to automatically hit the correct income and expense accounts for each transaction that's entered to QuickBooks through Knowify. Click the QuickBooks logo at the top of the screen, and you'll have the ability to set expense, income, job, and catalog defaults. Starting with expenses defaults, you can set an overall fallback expense account for anything that Knowify doesn't know how to categorize when it goes to QuickBooks. You can also set a default payment account for any cash or debit expenses or bill payments synced into QuickBooks from Knowify. To get more granular, this can also be set at the vendor level. This way, we can specify which expense account and which payment account we use for each vendor that we have in our account. For cases where there's nothing set and it's blank, Knowify will automatically default to the expense accounts shown above. For example, ABC Supply is set to supplies as the expense account and cash as the payment account. So, if we were to create a new expense for ABC Supply, we can enter in what we're purchasing and allocate it to a job in Knowify for job costing. And when this sends to QuickBooks, it's going to use the default mapping account that we set for ABC Supply, and the category will show supplies, and the payment account will be set to cash. However, if we were to review our mapping and create an expense for an account that is blank, in this case ABC Supply Canada, we can go through the same process and select the other vendor, create the same type of purchase, and Knowify will know to map it to the default account instead of what was set for ABC Supply, since ABC Supply Canada doesn't have its own default. We can see that the category is set to uncategorized and the payment account is set to bank. This way, all expenses can sync from Knowify to QuickBooks with less chance of failure. When mapping income from Knowify to QuickBooks, instead of selecting an income account, QuickBooks requires to map a default product or service for every invoice that's synced from Knowify to QuickBooks. You'll also be able to set a default payment account for any invoice payments that are created in Knowify and synced into QuickBooks. So with this example, the fallback will be service, but you can set at the client or at the job level what you'd like the default to be for that specific job. So for the job 10112, if we want this to go to sales instead, and our payment account to be cash, we can set up the default income service for a specific job to override the default for the account. If it's left blank, it'll automatically reference the default income service at the top of the screen. We'll create a new invoice for this job, and sync this invoice to QuickBooks. And when we review this invoice in our QuickBooks account, it will use the product or service specified for that job. This also works for default payment accounts at the client or job level. We set the default payment account for this job to go to cash, so if I were to record a payment on the invoice for this job and sync it into QuickBooks, it's going to use cash as the payment account where we receive payment, so we can run reports on that account in our QuickBooks. Service mapping can also be done at the line item level inside Knowify. So if you have a job with multiple line items and need to use multiple QuickBooks services in the same job, it can be set up by specifying which account you'd like to hit by using Associate to Catalog Item. We can select which item we want used when we sync to QuickBooks. And the next time I create an invoice, even though the default account is set to sales, this specific line item of the job will use the demolition item that we selected when mapping this contract and its corresponding invoices to QuickBooks. When time syncs from Knowify to QuickBooks, Knowify will require a default service for all time entries so that we know what service to use when the time entry hits the timesheet in QuickBooks. Here, we have it defaulted to hours. This way, everything can sync in and it will use hours if nothing else is specified. But if we're in our Knowify account and we want to have a more granular mapping of where the time goes in QuickBooks, a catalog item can be set on each phase and then when time is entered against this job and against this phase, it knows which service to use when syncing the time entry to QuickBooks. We'll open up our QuickBooks account and review the time entries. And we can see that the entry from this date is using electrical services instead of the default hours that was mapped previously. The catalog defaults will allow us to set the default income or expense account for any new catalog items that are generated in Knowify and synced to QuickBooks. So if we were to add a new product, we can always put in a default price and cost if needed. This will automatically show up in our product and service database in QuickBooks. And it'll be set with its own default accounts which will match what we had mapped in our Knowify account. Making changes to these accounts in Knowify or in QuickBooks will automatically update the item in the other software. We can see that there was an item updated from QuickBooks and it was mulch. And if we go to our catalog defaults, I can see that there's a new default expense account set. And again, if we were to update this in Knowify, this will update that item in QuickBooks as well, and we can see that the sync was successful in our transaction screen. Catalog defaults are also useful when syncing expenses to QuickBooks if we need more granular detail than using just the vendor level. For instance, 2AWG wire is set to electrical supplies. If we look at our expenses defaults, ABC supply is only set to supplies. We can create a purchase. We'll select ABC supply. And in the description, we can select the 2AWG wire so that Knowify knows to use the electrical supplies account instead of the default for ABC supply, which is just supplies. This way, if I need to have more than one expense account used on a single purchase, we can use different items to get different mapping. And if no item is specified, for this instance, I just typed materials, it'll go back to the vendor default for that line, but still know that the AWG item needs to go to its electrical supplies expense account. When pulling expenses from your QuickBooks account into Knowify, you can set up which accounts you would like to be ignored for the pull. So if there are non-job related expenses in QuickBooks that don't need to be in Knowify, such as accounting fees, this could be disabled so any expenses logged in QuickBooks using accounting fees will not pull into the Knowify account. If you have any other questions on how Knowify works with QuickBooks and would like to learn more, you can always reach out to us at support@knowify.com and our team will be happy to help you.